This idea of reducing everything, places and figures and houses, to geometric schemas, to cubes. The kind of breaking down of the cubes is not so much of an abstraction of a form, but actually a way of looking at the world.
Bell starts as a painter. He's operating in 2 dimensions. He's operating in the context of a competitive, pretty interesting cohort of young artists. And he moves from 2 to 3 dimensions really deliberately and almost against the grain of his initial ambitions, I think, in a really fascinating way. So in Larry Bell's early cubes, you see each facet becoming sort of a work within a work. Conrad Hawkes of 1961 was a piece that Bell came back to repeatedly to understand this shift both out of 2 to 3 dimensions and materially towards glass. The middle square of this piece is a 2-sided glass infill that shows the wall beyond it. There are all kinds of issues that this piece starts to initiate in the history of art. Institutional critique and the framing of the gallery wall arguably begins with this work. For Bell, however, it appeared that his interest was much more in this play between 2 and 3 dimensions in figural terms, and how the representation of 3 dimensions in 2 sets up these kind of ambiguities or paradoxes of representation.
In Larry Bell's work, glass is a fundamental element. The studies that happen at the Bauhaus, the idea that glass is that material, transparency, purity, is that kind of material that advances. Glass is that element that kind of starts to break down the idea of new types of geometries. In the earlier work, there's also that need to affect the glass, like something happens to the glass. It's not just the glass, it's not just the planes of the glass, but there's a pattern, there's an element that is overlaid on the glass. It might become more atmospheric or more graphic in this case. These particular works start to obscure the purity of the glass. So we call it dust, the dust glass. It's a chemical reaction that transforms the glass into this frosted finish.
Part of what I wanted to explore was kind of the tenor of Larry Bell's work, that art is both a kind of a faith and a game. This piece in particular just reminded me of Duchamp's obsession with chess and the degree to which that game became, for the second half of his life, a kind of antidote to the seriousness of the art world. What led me there was this iconic shot, the artist in his laboratory, Bell with his machine for fine finish coating, the different ways he both employed commercial vendors to produce glass in his early work and then brought the technology into his own practice and made it sort of central to his own art making. I think it's a story that parallels and in fact actualizes in more direct terms Andy Warhol's notion of the factory. And this was truly an industrial process made central to an artist's work. Both Warhol and Bell, I think, owe a certain debt to Marcel Duchamp for these kind of avenues of art making. The first simple question of gamesmanship in post-war art, and I think in conceptual practices more generally, is the confusion of the work of art with its locale or with its placement in the gallery. How art becomes art through its framing and through the devices that allow us to see art singly as autonomous creations. Historically, the central mechanism of that operation was the vitrine, simply a glass case that marked the kind of rarefied space of art, or more often artifact, from its surrounding. In the simplest of terms, I think a lot of people immediately gravitate to Bell's work for this rhyme with that mechanism of display, and it's worth kind of considering the basic allure of that. I like this shot of the show at Hauser & Wirth partly because it makes the case that they are totemic. Almost none of them rest right on the floor. They are cubes that are lifted in only a few ways, usually with a base that's a direct extrusion of their form down. Mostly plexiglass bases that are a clear echo in a more provisional material of the actual object that they mean to be. In this sense, there's a logic of obelisk that recurs over and over again. For Egyptians, Egyptians, when they saw a pyramid, they imagined it as the tip of an obelisk, kind of tip of the iceberg, with the obelisk's base extending forever into the core of the earth. And I think that play between the object and its armature is really important in Bell and maybe under-considered.
Is it a cube? Is it a series of planes? Is it a frame? Is it a vitrine? It's just not simply a patented cube. It has so many layers.